Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is a complicated disorder and can be very confusing to others. It doesn't help that it is almost never portrayed accurately in the media, where it is exaggerated or sensationalized. But why is this even relevant? If I'm not affected by this and I don't know anyone else affected by DID, why should I care? Well, no matter how it affects our own personal lives, it is always important to be educated and knowledgeable on the world around you. The misconceptions and stigmas surrounding DID, rooted from a general lack of knowledge and awareness, have serious negative impacts on those who are in fact affected by it. Many of those afflicted with DID do not actively seek a diagnosis, or even when they are diagnosed with DID, they don't believe it. They don't want to be associated with the mental disorder that has a murderous and psychotic connotation. Because of this, they don't get the help that they need, and their condition gets worse. In addition, knowledge of the dissociative disorder will help increase the chance of early intervention and a smoother treatment. But what is DID? DID, which is short for Dissociative Identity Disorder, is a mental health condition that is defined by two or more distinct identities in one body. It is categorized as a dissociative disorder, though it used to be considered a personality disorder. More on that later. It is categorized by someone having more than one distinct identity, with amnesia occurring between switches of identity. It is important to note that this is not caused by religion, culture, or substance abuse. It is a natural response from the brain. Before moving on, it's important that we debunk a few myths that circulate around DID. DID is fake. DID is in fact a real disorder and has been officially recognized as one since 1980. The myth is particularly dangerous as it contributes to the slowing down of diagnoses and increases late intervention. DID is the same as schizophrenia. DID and schizophrenia are extremely different. Schizophrenia is a form of psychosis, causing those affected by it to not always be able to distinguish their own thoughts from reality. It also, more notably, causes delusions and hallucinations, while DID does not. The myth further stigmatizes DID and is harmful to those affected by it, who may begin to think that they are hallucinating their multiple identities when they actually are not. DID is a personality disorder. Personality disorders have more to do with extreme emotions while maintaining a central sense of one's own identity. The identities in someone with DID are not isolated emotions, they are more real and complex than one-dimensional caricatures. The disorder used to be called multiple personality disorder, but this was changed as we've gained more insight on the human mind and realized that this name was not at all accurate. People with DID do not have a personality disorder, and it can make them marginalized when their identities are referred to as personalities. DID causes violence. There are very few documented violent crimes involving DID. This myth mainly comes from the media's sensationalization of the disorder, which is where the main stigma derives from. TV shows and movies like Split portray DID as a disorder that makes those with it violent, insane, and crime-driven. The actual lack of violence in individuals with DID and the violent stigma makes it very difficult for them to come to terms with their own diagnosis. People know the movies are fake. It was actually found by the University of Melbourne that movies have an extreme impact on the perception of mental health problems and makes those with DID hesitate to receive a diagnosis. Now that we have a fundamental understanding of DID and we are aware of the myths surrounding it, we can now develop our base knowledge of the disorder. DID is not as rare as some might think. There are estimates as high as 1% of the population of the United States being affected by the mental health condition. DID is caused by extreme or repeated trauma experienced during childhood. Sexual or physical trauma are the most common causes, but natural disasters or combat can also lead to DID. It mainly develops in the ages of 5 to 10, when the brain has not yet developed an appropriate response to trauma. Because on a fundamental level, DID is the brain's response to too much emotional distress. It decides that its best chance of survival is to wall off the problematic memories that contain this overwhelming amount of emotional distress, displacing them onto another identity to hold the trauma. This creation of an identity, or splitting, could lead to more and more splitting down the road, causing a whole multitude of identities to live within one system. But we're getting a little technical with the terminology here, so let's get back on track. One person can have up to 100 identities or even more. There is no limit. These identities can have different genders, ethnicities, interests, anything a person can be, an identity can be as well. There's a whole list of symptoms that come with DID in addition to the multiple identities. These include anxiety, delusions, depression, memory loss, thoughts of suicide, or self-harm. There is currently no single test to determine whether or not someone has DID. It is instead a series of tests to rule out any other possible explanations, like a head injury, for example. The signs of DID can be easily missed or confused for other behavioral or learning problems like ADHD. Because of this, most people with DID aren't diagnosed until well into adulthood. It might be helpful to explain what it's like to live with DID. The person can feel like different parts of them are in control at once, or they have limited control over certain parts of their body. They can have internal conflicts over how they remember certain events, or they could have no recollection of events altogether. To put it in perspective, anyone can feel like different versions of themselves depending on who they're talking to, where they are, what their mood is, but they're still able to maintain a central sense of self and awareness of who they are. Someone with DID cannot do this. They instead go as far to switch identities depending on certain situations or simply at random. In order to stay informed, it is very important to know and understand the terminology associated with DID. Otherwise specified dissociative disorder is a subtype of DID that is missing one of the main aspects. OSDD-1A includes amnesia but little to no distinction in identities, and OSDD-1B includes distinct identities but little to no amnesia. Disassociation is a spectrum. It goes from mild detachment from the world around you to severe detachment from physical and emotional experiences. Flashbacks are involuntary and strong re-experiences of past memories. Triggers are anything that causes a flashback or a switch, which we'll get to later. System refers to all of the identities as a whole. Alter is a common name for identity, specifically the identity separate from the core identity, and the name I'll be using from here on out. Fronting is the process of being in control of the body. The front is the area where alters control the body. The closer to the front, the more influence they have. Inner world / headspace is an area created by the brain for the alters to live when not fronting. Switching, as mentioned earlier, is when an alter voluntary or involuntarily gives up control to another alter. Splitting is a process of an alter separating from another, creating one or more new alters. Merging is a process of multiple alters becoming one alter, or an alter simply disappearing. Co-consciousness occurs when multiple alters front at the same time. Blending occurs when alters are so close to the front that their thoughts mix with the thoughts of the alter or alters fronting. The host is the alter that fronts the most of the time or is in charge of daily living. An emotional part, or EP, is an alter frozen in time / age and purpose to hold specific trauma. An apparently normal part, or ANP, is an alter that is able to develop or age. The core is the original identity. It is the identity that was present before the first split. It is not always the host, and it is possible for system to be unsure of which alter is their core. A protector is an alter that protects the system. They might front to protect the system physically. A persecutor is an alter that attempts to harm the system, sometimes in an effort to protect the system from further trauma. A soother is an alter tasked with soothing other alters. A caretaker is an alter tasked with taking care of younger alters or trauma holders. A spiritual protector is an alter that protects in the form of energy in mood. And a sexual alter is an alter that is holding sexual trauma, and they usually front during intimacy. That was a lot. Let's get into how you can support someone with DID. There are numerous ways for someone with DID to get help and support. For example, there are medications out there that can ease the other symptoms talked about before. The most effective treatment, however, is talk therapy. It can help the person identify and work through their past trauma as well as manage behavioral changes. It can also further the process of merging identities. Hypnotherapy also has some viability, as it can help someone recover blocked memories. There Though unfortunately there is no way to completely prevent or cure DID, its progression can be prevented through early identification and treatment. Identity change triggers should be identified so as to avoid those triggers. Stress and substance abuse are examples of common triggers. A strong support system is extremely important, and those affected by DID could create a crisis plan in case of an emergency. So if you know someone who is affected by DID, the best thing you can do for them is to volunteer to attend their therapy sessions, keep cool if switches to occur, and most importantly, educate yourself. While I agree this video was a great resource, there are other resources out there you can get into that get into more specific stuff instead of just a general overview. There's more terminology out there, and fun fact, I do not have DID, but there are other YouTubers out there that do in fact have DID and are more knowledgeable on the topic and DID as a whole and how it affects a person and how it feels and all of everything. Dissociative is a fantastic resource, will be linked in the description, along with Multiplicity Me and Acrylic and Ether. Those are great channels to check out and amazing resources. And that is all for this video. I hope you found it helpful, and get educated.